a 4-month-old puppy was rescued by a man in the freezing rain. After hearing the veterinarian's conclusion, the man imagined his heart had stopped beating. It was a stormy evening, and John was hurrying home, shielding himself with a soaked jacket against the relentless rain. The streetlights flickered faintly through the downpour, and the howling wind made every shadow seem alive. As he approached his front door, fumbling for his keys, a faint, almost pitiful whimper caught his attention. He froze, the sound cutting through the noise of the storm like a desperate plea. Curious and concerned, John turned his head toward the sound, straining to locate its source. The whimper came again, softer this time, almost drowned out by the pounding rain. He stepped off his porch and ventured into the muddy yard, the cold water quickly soaking through his sneakers. He traced the sound to a cluster of bushes near the fence, where the branches swayed violently in the wind. Pushing aside the dripping foliage, he found a drenched and shivering creature huddled in the shadows. Its tangled fur was matted with mud and rain, and its frightened eyes stared up at him with a mix of desperation and fear. For a moment, John hesitated, unsure if the animal might lash out. But its tiny frame, trembling uncontrollably, tugged at his heart. He crouched down, extending a hand slowly to avoid startling it further. "Hey there, little one," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the storm. The creature flinched, but didn't move away, its energy seemingly drained. John noticed the way it was trying to curl into itself, its frail body barely resisting the elements. Carefully, he removed his soaked jacket and draped it over the small animal, using it as a makeshift blanket. As he scooped it up, the creature let out a soft, almost resigned whimper but didn't struggle. The cold from its wet fur seeped through his clothes, but he didn't care. Holding the trembling bundle close, he whispered, "I've got you. You're safe now." As he made his way back to the house, the wind tugged at his jacket and the rain stung his face. The creature remained still in his arms, its shallow breaths barely audible. Once inside, John shut the door firmly against the storm and looked down at the little animal in his arms. Its wide, frightened eyes blinked up at him, and in that moment, he felt an unspoken promise to protect it. Believing it to be a stray puppy, John gently scooped the trembling animal into his arms, cradling it against his chest as the rain continued to pour. He whispered soothing words, hoping to calm its frantic shivering. The creature clung to him, its tiny claws gripping his jacket. Once inside, John quickly shut the door, shielding them from the storm's ferocity. The warmth of his home, the crackling fireplace, and the gentle hum of jazz on the radio offered immediate solace. He carefully placed the animal on a soft blanket near the fire and fetched a bowl of warm milk, setting it down hesitantly. To his surprise, the creature sniffed it cautiously before lapping it up with an intensity that betrayed its hunger. John chuckled softly, his heart melting at the sight. As he dried the animal with a soft towel, he noticed the dirt and twigs tangled in its fur. He fetched a comb and worked through the knots, all the while murmuring reassurances. When the creature whimpered, he paused, letting it sniff his hand before continuing. It seemed to trust him, its eyes flickering with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Finally, as the storm outside began to wane, John looked into the animal's wide, curious eyes. "Storm," he said aloud, testing the name. It felt right, a tribute to their dramatic first meeting. The little creature seemed to respond, tilting its head slightly, as if acknowledging its new name. John smiled, feeling an unspoken connection forming between them. In the following days, John couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Storm didn't behave like any puppy he had known. It avoided toys and chew bones, staring at them as though they were foreign objects. Instead, it paced methodically by the window, fixating on the movements outside with an intensity that made John wonder what it was looking for. One evening, as John relaxed on the couch, Storm suddenly froze, its ears twitching toward a faint noise. Moments later, It let out a low, guttural sound. Neither a bark nor a whine, but something deep and haunting. The eerie noise sent a shiver down John's spine, making him sit up in alarm. Storm's behavior grew stranger. It refused to interact with other dogs when John attempted to introduce it to his neighbor's Labrador, instead retreating behind John with a wary gaze. At night, it would position itself at the foot of his bed, staring into the darkened corners of the room with ears perked, as if it sensed something invisible. Its nocturnal howling would echo through the house, waking John with a mix of concern and confusion. Even mealtimes were peculiar. While John was eating chicken and beef, it ignored the dog kibble John bought. Its sharp, calculated glances and the way it carefully picked apart its food hinted at instincts far removed from a typical dog's carefree enthusiasm. Perplexed, John began documenting Storm's behaviors online, posting videos of its pacing, unusual sounds, and odd reactions to everyday objects. Comments flooded in as people speculated about Storm's true nature. Some suggested it was a rare breed with unique quirks, while others proposed it could be a wolf-dog hybrid. A few even ventured more exotic guesses, like a wild animal mistakenly assumed to be a dog. Driven by a mix of curiosity and concern, John dove deeper into his online research, comparing Storm's behaviors with various animals. With each new discovery, his unease grew, but so did his determination to uncover the truth. Determined to find answers, John bundled Storm into the car, his heart heavy with a mix of hope and apprehension. The drive to Dr. Charlie's clinic was tense, with Storm sitting unusually still in the back seat, its sharp eyes darting between the window and John's reflection in the rearview mirror. Arriving at the clinic, John noticed the curious glances from other pet owners in the waiting room. One child pointed at Storm, whispering to their parent, "What kind of dog is that?" Inside the examination room, Dr. Charlie greeted John warmly, but quickly turned her focus to Storm. Her expert hands moved methodically as she examined the animal. She started with the basics, checking its heart rate, teeth, and ears, but her expression grew more serious with each observation. Storm remained eerily calm, its gaze locked on Dr. Charlie's movements as though it understood it was being scrutinized. "John, this is unusual," Dr. Charlie muttered, flipping through reference images on her tablet. "These teeth, they're too sharp for a dog, even a puppy. And look at this fur pattern. It's irregular, not consistent with any dog breed I know." She asked questions about how John had found Storm, what it ate, and its behavior at home, taking detailed notes as John explained the peculiarities. After a thorough physical exam, Dr. Charlie brought out a book of wildlife species. She flipped to a page and compared it to Storm, her brow furrowing. "John," she said finally, her tone gentle but firm, "Storm isn't a puppy. This is a baby hyena." John blinked, unable to process the words at first. "A hyena? Here? How is that possible?" he stammered, looking at the small creature curled up on the examination table. Dr. Charlie explained that malnourishment and stress had likely masked its true identity, making it easier to mistake for a stray puppy. Hyenas are extremely rare in their area, and she speculated it might have been trafficked or accidentally transported from its natural habitat. "It's young, maybe just a few months old," she added, her voice tinged with both curiosity and concern. The revelation hit John hard. Memories of Storm's odd behaviors, its cautious glances, its howling, and its refusal to play like a normal puppy, suddenly made sense. As Dr. Charlie detailed the next steps, explaining the need to contact wildlife authorities and arrange for Storm's transfer to a sanctuary, John felt a bittersweet ache. The animal he had grown to care for was far more extraordinary than he had imagined, and its journey with him was nearing its end. Before we continue the story, do you think anyone would want to adopt Storm, knowing he is a hyena? Comment and come back to the story. The revelation left John stunned. For a long moment, he simply stared at Storm, now curling protectively into itself on the examination table, as if sensing the weight of the moment. "A hyena?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was saving a lost puppy." Dr. Charlie nodded empathetically. "I understand, John. It's not uncommon for young animals to mask their true nature when they're malnourished or stressed, but hyenas, even juveniles like Storm, have very specific needs that can't be met in a domestic environment. They're highly social and thrive in complex groups, which makes raising one in isolation particularly difficult and potentially dangerous as they grow." As she explained the situation further, she brought up images of wildlife sanctuaries on her computer screen, showing John how such places provide the space, care, and social structure that animals like Storm require. "This sanctuary specializes in rehabilitating exotic animals," she said. "Storm will have companions and the opportunity to learn the behaviors it would naturally develop in the wild." John looked at the photos, his chest tightening. "But he's so calm with me," he murmured. "He even comes to me when he's scared. How can I let him go?" Dr. Charlie smiled gently. "That's because he trusts you, John. You gave him warmth and safety when he needed it most. That bond you've built won't disappear. But you've done your part. Now it's time to let experts take over so Storm can thrive the way he was meant to." Still, the decision weighed heavily on him. As Dr. Charlie made calls to the sanctuary, John stayed by Storm's side, watching the animal carefully. Storm's intelligent eyes flicked toward him occasionally, its body language relaxed in his presence, but always subtly alert. "I feel like I'm losing a friend," John admitted quietly. Dr. Charlie paused her calls to reassure him. "What you're doing is incredibly selfless, John. Not everyone would make this choice, but it's the right one, for you and for Storm. And who knows, the sanctuary may even let you visit him someday." Hearing that brought a small glimmer of comfort. While the bittersweet reality of parting with Storm lingered, John began to understand that giving the hyena a chance to live a fuller, more natural life was the greatest gift he could offer. Parting with Storm was difficult. Over their brief time together, John had grown deeply attached to the creature, despite its peculiarities. He spent the night before the transfer sitting beside Storm's makeshift bed, stroking its fur as it rested with its head on his knee. Every now and then, Storm would glance up at him with its sharp, intelligent eyes, as if sensing the change that was about to come. John stayed awake long after Storm had fallen asleep, replaying memories of their time together, the cautious steps it took toward him on the first night, its peculiar howls, and even the odd moments when it would sit beside him, watching the rain outside the window. On the day of the transfer, John prepared Storm's travel crate with extra care, lining it with soft blankets and tucking in one of his old shirts for comfort. As the sanctuary staff arrived, Storm seemed unusually quiet, its gaze darting between the strangers and John. It hesitated to enter the crate, turning to John with a look of uncertainty. "It's okay, Storm," John whispered beside him. "This is what's best for you." Storm slowly stepped into the crate, its movements deliberate and cautious. Once inside, it turned to face John, its ears twitching slightly at the sound of his voice. As John crouched beside the cage to say goodbye, Storm pressed its head gently against his hand, a quiet gesture of gratitude and farewell. John's throat tightened as he whispered, "You're going to be okay. You're going to thrive." The sanctuary staff assured him that Storm would be cared for and invited him to visit once the animal had settled into its new environment. As they loaded the crate into the vehicle, Storm's eyes never left John, watching him intently through the bars. The moment the van pulled away, John stood, rooted in place, a mixture of loss and relief washing over him. He knew he had done the right thing, but the empty spot in his heart reminded him of the unique bond they had shared. Later that evening, the house felt unusually silent, without Storm's pacing or low howls. John sat by the window where Storm used to sit, watching the rain. A faint smile tugged at his lips as he thought of Storm exploring its new home, surrounded by companions and the wild it belonged to. Though the parting had been painful, he realized that sometimes the greatest acts of love require letting go. The house felt emptier that evening. John instinctively reached for Storm's bowl at dinner, only to realize it was no longer needed. He paused, staring at the spot where Storm used to curl up by the fireplace. A pang of sadness tugged at him, but he also felt a quiet peace, knowing he had done what was best for the creature. In the days that followed, John found himself revisiting the memories often. While brewing coffee, he would glance at the window where Storm used to sit, watching the world with an intense focus. One morning, he noticed a paw print on the muddy ground outside, likely from a neighborhood dog, but it immediately brought Storm to mind. Smiling wistfully, he decided to channel his emotions into something productive. John began writing about his experience, detailing the story of how he found Storm, the mysteries it presented, and the eventual discovery of its true identity. He shared these posts on his blog, which had already gained a small following during Storm's time with him. The response was overwhelming. Readers reached out with messages of support, sharing their own stories of wildlife encounters and expressing admiration for John's decision to prioritize Storm's well-being over his own attachment. Inspired, John started volunteering at the sanctuary on weekends, helping care for animals with similar stories. On his first visit, he caught a glimpse of Storm in its new habitat. The hyena seemed relaxed and confident, mingling with others of its kind. When Storm's sharp eyes briefly met his, John felt a rush of reassurance. It was thriving, just as Dr. Charlie had promised. Over time, John came to see the experience not just as a rescue story, but as a profound lesson. He began speaking at community events, sharing what Storm had taught him about the delicate balance between humans and wildlife. It wasn't just about saving an animal. It was about understanding the wild, respecting its boundaries, and learning to coexist. In his quiet moments, John would still think of Storm and the bond they had shared. But now, those memories came with a sense of gratitude. Storm had changed him, opening his eyes to a broader world and teaching him the true meaning of compassion. Storm had taught John an invaluable lesson. True compassion often means letting go. In the weeks that followed, this realization deepened as John found himself reflecting on their time together. On quiet evenings, he would sit by the fireplace where Storm had once curled up, holding the tattered chew toy Storm had ignored, but John had kept as a keepsake. He thought about the small moments, how Storm would glance at him with cautious trust, how it paced by the window as if longing for something John couldn't provide. John's life began to shift subtly. He started noticing the small details of the natural world that he had previously overlooked. The birds nesting in the trees outside his home, the deer that occasionally wandered through his backyard, and even the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. He began researching more about wildlife conservation, curious to understand the habitats and behaviors of animals like Storm. One day, John received an update from the sanctuary. Attached to the email was a photo of Storm lounging in the grass with another hyena, both appearing content. Seeing Storm in its natural element brought an unexpected wave of relief and pride. He printed the photo and framed it, placing it on the mantle as a reminder of their journey. Occasionally, John would drive to the sanctuary and watch Storm from a distance, observing how it thrived among its own kind. On one visit, he saw Storm approach the edge of the enclosure and lift its head toward him, as if recognizing his presence. Though their lives had diverged, the bond they had shared felt as strong as ever. True compassion, John realized, wasn't just about letting go. It was about continuing to care in ways that truly mattered, even from afar. The memories of his time with Storm became a touchstone for him, a reminder of the extraordinary connection they had shared and the new purpose it had inspired in his life. After watching this story, do you think it's a great thing to help people and animals? There are many more true stories on the channel for you to enjoy. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to let us know you still love animals and their stories.